Well, good afternoon, everybody. As always, I'm very excited to have another live interview. And my guest today actually has a very fashionable taste in dress shirts, as it looks like we're wearing the exact same shirts.
That's funny.
Uh, Kevin, thanks so much for joining me. Good to see you again.
Yeah, Chad, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. And yeah, I didn't pick up on the dress shirt thing, but that's I got blue yet gray. It looks like so we got similar taste. I like it.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, we're coordinated, if nothing else. So
Yeah, yep.
So I want to jump into a number of different topics with you. I know that we talked before this. You were born in Pennsylvania. You moved to Florida. You've got investments in numerous different markets. You even actually came up with a great term that I'm going to start using is you're geographically agnostic in terms of just looking for deals. So I want to get into a number of areas on how you source deals, whether that's deals that you're intentionally looking for yourself or whether it's deals that are being brought to you, how you go through your underwriting process and synthesize a deal, and then ultimately close it. And then we'll also just jump into some other topics like what's happening with inflation and interest rates and what you
Sure.
see in store for 2022. And I'd also encourage anyone who's joined in live, please feel free to ask any questions in the chat, and we will try to get to as many as we can. I missed a couple last week. My apologies. I got a new computer. I had an error on my end. So I apologize to those people who asked questions I missed. We will try to get into all of them today. Neil, thanks for joining in. Pumped for another awesome interview. Thanks for joining in. So let's jump right into it. When you're looking to find a deal, obviously you have to have deals come across your desk. So either you're hunting for them yourself, or you've got relationships, presumably with people all across North America. Let's start with how you would find a deal yourself, and then we'll get into how you would look at a deal that gets sent to you. What are you doing to find deals? And just as a
Yeah.
preface, I think that this is a really important question because this is probably what most first-time investors and even some experienced investors struggle with is actually finding deals, whether it's an off-market deal or just or a good deal. What are you
Yep.
doing to source deals yourself?
No, it's a fantastic question. In order to answer it more accurately, I'm going to go back in the time machine just a little bit and kind of give a little bit of a background of how I got started buying real estate. And ultimately, it was roughly 20 years ago. I was literally 19 years old when I got introduced to the business and bought my first rental property. Just a low end starter single family home, really rough in a not so great neighborhood, and that's really where I cut my teeth. And I cut my teeth in the single family residential space and small multis, duplexes and triplexes for a number of years, about 5 to 6 years, just really trying to get the lay of the land and really more so not reinventing the wheel from what my mentor had, what his business model looked like. Right, I just was replicating what he had taught me. And so one of the lessons that I learned early on, back when I was buying these single family properties, again taught to me by my mentor, was that the best deals are had off market. Again, and residential off market is different than that of commercial off market, but they have a lot of similarities as well. And really, what off market means to me, at least what it means to our team, and what it meant back then, was somewhat circumventing agents or brokers and literally going direct to owners, finding the motivation of a seller, whatever it might be. There's many different forms of motivation, but finding that motivation of a seller in a non-competitive environment, meaning that there's not 10 other people having that same conversation with that property owner that ultimately might, push that price up or inflate that price to a higher price point, to a retail price point. So we want to be able to buy for under their current market value. And so that worked really well. That strategy of sending mailers, putting out, back then, putting out physical signs. We used to put ads in newspapers, whatever would get the phone to ring directly from property owners to us. And we would selectively pick a kind of a target area. I think in some residential real estate terms, they call it a farm area, right? Like I want to pick my farm area where I want to be the specialist. For me, it equated to about 8 different zip codes back then. And we've essentially carried over those skill sets when I got into the commercial side of the business, first buying multifamily apartment complexes. Fast forward to, I guess the last 10 years, we've been buying mobile home parks along with a few other niche asset classes. But mobile home parks have been, for the most part, our bread and butter for the past decade. And, what I saw when I kind of jumped over into the commercial side of things is that it wasn't all that common for buyers or investors to utilize those strategies that I had used in the residential days, right? Like literally sending out hundreds or thousands of mailers, putting out signs, putting ads in papers. And so ultimately wanted to see if those strategies would be as effective in the commercial space, and they were. And so, brokers play a very important role in the inside of a transaction, right? And so I love brokers. We do many deals with brokers that are in our industries, but I always like going against the grain, and I always like finding, I like to put myself in a non-competitive environment. And so we've carried over those same skill sets over to commercial. And so most of the deals that we buy, to answer your question now, most of the deals that we have purchased over the past decade have been direct to owner. And for the most part, I would say that the highest return on our efforts have been a result of cold calling and then direct mail. And it's kind of flip-flopped. It used to be all direct mail. We'd get about 70 to 80% of our results. And it's actually flopped over now to more cold calling definitely gets the results. Whereas people are just getting inundated with mail. And, junk mail existed 10, 15 years ago. And now that's pretty much all that's in your mailbox, because most of the things that we get that are important actually come digitally now. So whatever's in your mailbox most of the time is just junk. You can just toss it all away. So with that being said, we really pride ourselves on being really good at understanding the properties we'd like to buy in certain respective markets, and then building rapport with these owners, sometimes over months and years. We've had deals that have taken 5 years of rapport building before that owner has decided that he either needs or wants to sell that property. So I don't know if I directly answered your question, Chad,
Absolutely.
but I rambled on a little bit there. But in any event, we love off-market deals, and that's how we typically find our opportunities.
Yeah, that background was very helpful on that, and I would share a similar story myself as an investor in my portfolio with a few partners. Is that a lot of those were off market deals. So, but we have bought stuff through other brokers. But I know a lot of successful investors that typically rely on both systems. Though they want to have relationships with some brokers so that they get sent deals, but they're also hunting for things on their own. So I think your background and what led you to that was quite helpful. If I could delve into that a little bit further, and I don't want your secret sauce, because I'm sure you guys have a system that's you're very comfortable with. So maybe you can even just answer it somewhat generically. But what message would you be saying when you're cold calling one of these owners to get your proverbial foot in the door?
Yeah, and I don't think there's really a secret sauce here. I mean, it's just putting the work in. I mean, really, there's not a secret. If you have basic communication skills and you have a friendly demeanor, then what I found is that these calls, there's no like special sales strategy involved, because the motivation is very different. And if you own a piece of commercial income property, it's very different than that of a person. Again, going back in time when we were buying single family properties, those single family properties, for the most part, were owner occupied, and they didn't produce income. And so if that owner of that property, if they had a drop in their personal income or lost a job, that motivation is very different than that of a individual like you or I that owns a income producing property, that maybe we have the fits a little bit with the property because our tenant base isn't the best, and or the infrastructure of that property, we get a lot of water line breaks and just more headaches than anything else, but it pays the bills. It's self-sustaining, it supports itself. And so the motivations on the sales side of a commercial property are, again, very different than that of a residential property. And so for the most part, what I found is that, there's always a point in time in the life cycle of a commercial deal, again, whether it's industrial, a mobile home park, a multifamily property, again, you name it. There's, big list that falls underneath that subcategory of commercial. But there's always a point in time when a seller either needs or wants to sell a property. Needs is a little bit more of a motivation, but not necessarily, hey, I'm going to fire sale this thing, got to get this thing blown out. A need could be, I'm going through a divorce, so that's requiring that we look to liquidate this property. Could be a partnership split up. Could be some health issues that were unexpected, what have you. And a one is, again, as we talked about earlier, like, just looking to pluck out some of these more headache properties out of my portfolio. Don't really need to sell, but just want to make my life a little easier, not get as many phone calls in the middle of the night, what have you. And so, I kind of want to just get rid of this one over here. And now I think it's time. Our objective when we make these calls is to simply rapport, have friendly conversation, to have a continuing follow-up with them. And so our objective is to get them on that day, call them or send them a letter that day or that month when they wake up and they say, I either need or I want to sell this property. I want to be there. I want to be the top of mind. It's kind of like, I like to, compare it to, talk about junk mail, right? Everyone that's listening to this right now, there's two different types of junk mail you get all the time. I don't care if you want it or not. Credit card offers in the mail. American Express has probably been sending you, 30 pieces of the mail every year for the last, whatever, since you turned 18 years old, right? And they will continually do that because at some point in time, there's a chance that you might need a credit card and you might just choose the American Express because it's been in your face for the last, 10, 15, 20 years. Same thing with tires in your car. They know they send you tire ads all the time because at some point in time, they're going to hit you when the day is right, where either your car didn't pass inspection because you need new tires, or we had a blowout, now you need a new set, what have you. Like there's going to be at some point in time where they're going to get you and you're going to think, oh, I need to grab one of those flyers out of the mailbox because I get them every week. And ultimately I need tires now. And, they've been sending it to you for 4 years before you actually need to buy them. So I want to be that. That's what we do with these properties that we're looking to potentially buy. I want to be top of mind all the time so that when that day comes, they make that decision. They think of our team. They think of me. They think of our team, what have you. So again, I'm not skirting the question of like, what's the secret sauce? Cause it's really not. This is a business owner having another conversation with a business owner and finding a way for me to add value to them and their business when that timing's right. And value meaning that giving them a fair offer and making it as painless of a transaction as possible. That's kind of what we pride ourselves in. And we've got, references that we share with owners. We let them talk to other sellers that we've worked with in the past. We kind of create this somewhat open community and space of communication that they can get comfortable with us and knowing that they don't have to take it out to the market and deal with a million other potential buyers, deal with a broker, go through that whole process and just sell it to someone that they like and trust and that will ultimately carry that torch on for them in the future. So.
Yeah, that was so very well said, and you're right. I guess there isn't a secret sauce there other than the formula is pretty straightforward. It takes work. You have to find a way to get your phone to ring, so people calling you back, and you just have to have an honest conversation with them about what your objective is. And if you're doing it frequently enough and having enough people registering with that, you're right. Someone's going to eventually buy tires. Someone's eventually going to sign up and get a credit card. So I think that was very well said on that, and I want to dive into a few more topics on there because I think that there's some more value to extract. And someone commented that our thing was freezing, but they said it's good now. So hopefully that's good. But if you're having issues, maybe just leave another note in the chat. We'll try to address it if it's freezing on one of our ends as well. But 2 points that I want to get more thoughts on is how are you getting the list of owners to contact? And then when you start that conversation, and assuming someone's like, we're not looking to sell right now, we're going to sell 2 years out, what are you doing to build that into a database so that you can be following up with them? So two-part question.
Yeah, no, great questions. And as far as where we get that information from, I'm going to speak in more general terms of commercial real estate. Every different type of commercial real estate has its own zoning type. So let's speak to multifamily apartments. Pretty much any county or municipality. And speaking to North America, I know you're based in Canada, Chad, and I don't know if it's exactly the same there or not. I'm assuming it's probably very similar, right? But there's a classification, for each county as to what's classified as a multifamily property. It's public record. Same thing goes with industrial property. Same thing goes with retail, office, hospitality. And so there's many different list brokers, there's list sources out there where you can, instead of you digging through the public records yourself and whatever respective counties that you're looking in, there's, companies that put together and aggregate this data that you can purchase it from. List Source is one of the big ones. There might be other ones out there. With that being said, mobile home parks are somewhat unique. A lot of mobile home parks were built way back before there was any even zoning ordinances. And so a lot of them have, they're grandfathered in. The underlying zoning would not support, the use of a mobile home park today. And so it's not as simple as just searching by, the current zoning status of a property to find a list of mobile home parks. And so we've taken a much more granular approach with building our own database. So we've got an in-house team. We've had an in-house team here for the past 7 years. And essentially what we do is we pick the markets, we first search by market, right? Like I want to make sure that we're buying in a growing market, a market that has high demand for affordable housing, because that's what we provide. And ultimately, once we provide those markets to our team, we say essentially go in and we want you to find every single mobile home park that exists that is 50 spaces or larger. And, there's some there's some random lists out there of mobile home parks. There's no complete 100% complete list. And so a lot of this has been manual work for our team over the years. The good thing about mobile home parks is when you look on Google Earth and you look at an aerial, it's very easy to identify a mobile home park from an aerial viewpoint. It's very easy to pick it out, like when you look at a landscape. And so we've literally had a team using a grid pattern go through all these respective markets over, I think it's about 130 of them, and essentially visually identify every single mobile home park that exists within that respective marketplace. Now we have an overlay platform that we use called Parlay 2.0, which essentially is the GIS overview or GIS overlay on top of Google Earth that allows us to see parcel lines and things of that nature. And so we have built our mobile home park database manually, and there was no other way to do it. It's a lot easier in pretty much every other asset class than that of mobile home parks. And so, again, speaking to any other asset out there, you can pretty much buy a list from a company such as a List Source, and there's probably a lot of others just like that one. And you're basically just going to pay per lead. Now, the other important thing to understand is that most commercial properties are owning an entity. They're not owning a personal name. And so there's a couple layers you got to get through in order to actually be able to find the correct contact info. You might get lucky and you're going to find some of those properties that are owned in personal or individual names. Those are typically pretty good leads. That means it's a probably very less sophisticated mom and pop owner. We've had some phenomenal opportunities come from those, but most, owners have them in entities, LLCs, corps, what have you. And so we have an additional layer that we go into, which is Secretary of State's websites, wherever the entity is actually formed. And we literally dig through the Secretary of State websites and find out who the managing members are, who the shareholders are if it's a corporation, find out who those individuals are that are owners of that property. Now, once we have that information, we go a level deeper. We have skip tracing software that's used by the likes of like private investigators and things like that you can work to get access to. And we essentially go in and find the cell phone numbers, the home phone numbers, the home mailing addresses, all that personal contact information for each one of the respective owners of that LLC or each one of the members of the LLC or corporation, what have you. And so that's essentially how we've built our own database. There's some easier ways to do it now, maybe not mobile home parks, but there's sites out there. Like, for example, Reonomy. I'm not sure if Reonomy offers their services in Canada or not.
Not yet, but it's supposed to be coming at some point.
Yeah, so like that's really good. I mean, Reonomy is just that. It's basically it's like a co-star with a couple of different additional layers of support and information in there for people like us that are looking to buy properties or get information and get contact info for property owners. But we built this all manually, and we know that it's the most accurate data possible, and that's what we utilize to again create this database of folks that we continually contact and follow up with. As far as your question about how do we what's the next step after we have that information? We've got we've used different CRMs over the years. I'm not sure that I don't really have a dog in the fight of which CRM's the better one, right? That's not really my forte. Today we use a CRM called Fresh Sales. I'm sure there's others that do it better, but I see a lot of folks get caught up in the complexities and how many features this CRM's got these 800 features and this one only has 400 features. I mean, how many are you really going to use, right? Like it doesn't even have to be all that complicated. You just need reminders set. You need to be able to take notes about your conversations with owners and actually set reminders of when you're going to follow up with them. I mean, it could be as simple as that. And there's plenty of free CRMs out there that will do that. One that comes to mind is Insightly. Insightly is one we used to use probably like 7-8 years ago. It's free, and it will literally handle probably 95% of what you would ever need a CRM to handle. Now, we've got some other integrations custom built into ours to where we have some automated follow-ups, text follow-ups, personalized text follow-ups. We've got a mail house kind of integrated into ours to where we can drop like one-off mailers like Christmas cards, holiday cards, birthday cards, things like that. And so we take a little bit more personalized approach. So we've got some of these integrations built in there that allow us to kind of take it up to the next level. But again, that's been built over years and years, and that's not necessary if you're just getting started. So I'll stop rambling now. Let's open up for questions.
Yeah, well, I both points were fantastic. I love the idea of digging a little bit deeper to get more information. If you see it's owned by an entity, you got to figure out who's behind the entity so you can actually get to the people that are the decision makers. That's a fantastic point. And then I would agree with you completely. I've used a ton of different CRMs over the years, and I've found that for me personally, the ones with all the bells and the whistles were too overwhelming.
Yes.
And I right now I'm using a very basic one. It's on the Zoho platform, which we've
Mhm.
customized to be for real estate. But we use it all the time, so it doesn't have as many features as some of the more dedicated ones for real estate. But if you're using it for like the foundational components, I agree. That's much more important than half-assed using the entire thing, but not using any of it very well. So I agree with
Yes.
those points altogether. And then one other point that I really liked is how you overlay on Google Maps where the parks are. And I think that industrial shares a lot of similarities with that, where you
Mhm.
can always find the industrial parks in any city. They're always going to be clustered together. It's usually a zoning, a
Mhm.
regulatory issue where they want to have all those industrial businesses together. There's advantages to having suppliers and customers nearby. So you could open up a map of any city in the world and you could find clusters of industrial properties. And I usually say if someone's starting to look for industrial properties in a market they don't know, start on Google Earth and actually look for where the clusters of industrial properties are. And much the same way that you are, is you can actually do Google Street View and do a virtual drive down the road and see who the companies that are occupying these buildings, see what's there. You get a pretty good sense of whether it's a manufacturing city or whether it's a distribution focused city. You can find a lot virtually now, which that wasn't available 15, 20 years ago. So there are some great tools that make things easy on that. So thanks for answering that.
Yeah, and I can share what we use, and again, there's probably other ones out there. Parlay 2.0 is the GIS overlay for Google Earth. So again, Parlay, Parlay 2.0. I think I think that's just the website as well. But so that's I'm sure there's other ones out there, but that's what we use. And then as far as like the skip tracing, there's a number of them. One that's probably the most cost effective is it's called Locate Plus, locateplus.com. And then a few of the other more robust ones, I know at least here in the States, some of the big brokerage firms, Marcus and Millichap, Colliers, CBRE, most of those guys use LexisNexis, which is a common service provider for skip tracing. And then there's another one that we used to use. It's pretty hard to get set up with, and you might have some challenges, and it's expensive as well, but it's probably the best data out there. It's called TLO. It's actually owned by, I believe it's TransUnion. I always mix up TransUnion and I can't think of the other. There's the three credit bureaus. There's Equifax, TransUnion, and I'm drawing a blank for the other one. But anyway, it's owned by one of the three credit bureaus. So the information is about as accurate as it can possibly get, but it's very difficult to get set up with. So Locate Plus is probably the lowest barrier to entry to get good quality skip trace data.
Yeah, we'll add those to either the comments or the description after. So thanks for sharing those. Graphics Equip made another great point. Maps are also great for seeing roof conditions. So
Mhm.
it's the fantastic point on that is you can get a pretty good sense of what it is before you even go too far down the rabbit hole on that. So thanks for the comment. So moving on to the other area where you can have opportunities come across your desk. So first is how you're hunting for them, and I think you did an awesome job of explaining that. Second is having brokers send you deals, which is another great way of seeing things. Maybe those
Mhm.
are off market deals where you're the first one that sees it, that the broker's putting it in front of. Maybe it's just a deal that has been overlooked by other people where you see an opportunity, but you first have to have those brokers sending you deals. So
That's right.
whether it's existing guys that you've already have relationships with, or if you were to go into a new market, how would you advise someone to start those conversations?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think being very clear about what it is, what your business is, and what types of properties you're seeking to buy, that's the first step. All too often I see folks that are just getting started, and they say, okay, well, industrial seems like it's a hot sector, and I know a lot of guys. I know Chad; he's making a ton of money in industrial, and so they don't really set their parameters. They just say industrial is a very vague terminology. They go find the top industrial brokers in the marketplace. They somehow talk them into grabbing lunch or coffee with them, and they don't really bring too much value to the conversation because ultimately they really don't know what they're looking for. They haven't really got a clear enough vision as to, you know, what types of industrial properties they seeking, what price points, like, do they have good debt sources lined up that, take down the deal, or good partners, or do they have easy access to equity? Do they have the pieces of the puzzle that are going to ultimately help that broker achieve a commission when he transacts that property, right? Like that's first and foremost of a broker. They only get paid when they transact the property. And so they only want to be spending their time with real buyers that are going to be able to get the deal to a closing table, right? And so I think just having a very clear vision as to what exactly it is you're looking to achieve in the investment space, the type of investment vehicle, and then hone in on a much more micro level as to, like, for us, like we only look at mobile home parks that are 80 plus spaces in size. The MSA population, we'll look in some smaller markets, but it has to have a 100,000 plus population in the general MSA. Unemployment rate cannot be above, it's like 6.4%. Now we've adjusted it slightly, can't be above 6.4%. Median home prices have to be above $150,000. So and average two-bedroom rents have to be above $1,000. So we have this.
Lost Kevin. Chad, are you hearing Kevin?
I can hear Kevin. Yep.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Continue on. Something happened on my end. Sorry.
Okay. No problem.
So anyway, we have set criteria. We know exactly what we're looking for. So if a broker sends a deal to us that is outside of those parameters, I can very quickly say, like, that's not a good fit for X, Y, and Z reasons. Like, we have a very clear trajectory of what we want to buy and why we want to buy. And so I think having that prepped is very important. And then, once you get a broker to start sending you opportunities to look at, make sure that I think another thing that happens is a broker will send an opportunity out to a new prospective client, a buyer, investor, and it might not fit those parameters that maybe they haven't clearly conveyed to the broker, but they don't respond and give feedback to that opportunity. Broker sends it to them, and they open up their inbox. They see that it's not a good fit for XYZ reasons, but they don't convey those reasons back to the broker. And if that happens enough times, normally just a couple of times, ultimately probably what will occur is that broker might not be giving out that potential buyer the time of day anymore, because they haven't given them the guidance that they need to formulate that relationship. So I think just communicate often, communicate clearly as to what you're looking for. And, again, top of mind is everything. Right now, there are way more buyers out there than there are opportunities, especially speaking to your industry. I mean, pretty much any asset class at this point in time, maybe other than, hospitality is still, getting a slow go back from the pandemic. If you're looking to buy a mall, you might have the pick of the litter, right? But like, other than that, there's way more buyers than there are opportunities. So like your goal needs to be stay top of mind as well with that broker. And that means as close as you can get to being nagging without being nagging, right? To stay top of mind and know that they know you're serious and that you're a real buyer, and that you've got money and you're ready to pounce on an opportunity when it comes your way. So, and then, I'll take it to additional, one step further. One thing that we have done that has proven to be incredibly valuable is, we'll, just like we database properties, we'll database who the brokers are in our respective marketplaces or regions that specialize in that asset class. And speaking of mobile home parks. And whenever we do a deal, whether it's, let's say we do a deal with Marcus and Milchap, well, guess what? We highlight that deal and we send it out to our entire list. And that list also includes every other broker from these other houses, right? And make sure that we showcase the deal, what we paid for it, what our value add plan looks like, whatever the business strategy is around that opportunity. We also maybe highlight the rest of our portfolio, other markets that we own in, just any other details that are relevant that might pique the interest of a broker to reach out to us when they have an opportunity that might fit some of those parameters that we've outlined on that email. And we'll do the same thing if we buy an off-market deal. If we buy directly to owner, we'll make sure that we literally highlight that deal. We send it out to our entire list. We'll post it on LinkedIn. And I know that, it's getting the eyeballs of the brokers that are in our space. And if they might not have given me the time of day before, after seeing 2 or 3 deals transact with our company that they weren't in the middle of, there's a good chance that they're going to reach out and probably have a conversation, or they'll take my phone call when I call them the next time around, because they know that we're players. We know that we'll get the deal done and that they'll ultimately get paid, and we won't waste their time or be tire kickers.
That is honestly the best advice I've ever heard for investors that want to talk to brokers. Without question, the best advice. If I could summarize, let me know if I missed anything, because I really want to emphasize that, because there's a ton of value that every investor should be using this as a roadmap. First, you have to have a value proposition, clearly describe what a vision. You need to clearly describe what you're looking for in the property as particularly as possible. You need to be conveying this to brokers and also giving feedback to them if they send you a property on why that didn't work or why it didn't work. So there's an ongoing two-way conversation. You want to stay in touch with them without nagging, but just that top of mind awareness as 3. And then 4, which I suppose piggybacks on number 3, is displaying it on social media or however you could do it if you have a mailing list, without bragging about it, but just actually just describing a deal that you just did, and taking advantage of the fact that people see this. And if I was working in that space and I saw Kevin just did a deal with my competitor, that's going to make it a lot more easy for me to say, well, I got an opportunity for you to reach out. Does that summarize those 4 points pretty well?
Absolutely. We actually closed a couple big deals at the end of December in the mobile home park space, December 2021. And we just happened to have our national industry conference last week in Orlando, where all the big brokers are there. And I can't tell you how many so the 2 deals we closed, they were direct to owner, and many they were in Chicago areas. I mean, major market, and the owner owns other properties. All the brokers know this owner, and just no one had been able to to formulate that relationship with that owner to get an exclusive listing. And so I can't tell you, more than a handful of brokers came up to me, many which I know, a number of others I didn't know that were on a team. Maybe I knew the lead person, but I didn't know some of their associates. But also, many people came up to me and reference those 2 deals that they had. They knew Ken, the owner, and had been trying to talk to him for years, and this, that, and the other, and just really impressed that we got those deals to the closing table, and ultimately they never had the opportunity to do so. So that put us in a different light in their eyes, and that we we'll get things done, hell or high water. We will get it to the closing table no matter what it takes. And so it just it was proof of concept there for sure.
Well, and what's beautiful about this conversation so far, from my standpoint, and I would suggest that anyone that's listening, whether they're inexperienced or considering being an investor, is if you take those 2 things that you just described. 1, have a system for finding off-market deals, and you've gone through that in pretty good detail. And then 2nd, have a system for getting brokers to send you properties. You're going to see a ton of opportunities. That takes work, it takes initiative, and it takes a commitment to wanting to do it. But if you're doing those 2 things, you're going to see so many deals and opportunities that you're going to have a hard time actually passing on some things, because you're just going to see so many great deals. So I would take those 2 things that Kevin mentioned to heart. I think that is very profound wisdom. And I think the second part of where I wanted to take this conversation was, now that there's deals on your table. So we discussed how you can actually get deals coming across your desk. What do you do with these deals next? So how do you go through the underwriting process? How do you look at it from an investment standpoint? And I think we could get into a few different areas on at a high level, what's your 30,000 square feet. I always think in square feet. Your 30,000 foot view on how you'd look at a deal quickly, and then once you dive into it further, what process you go to. So I just want to give you a second to think about that, because there's a few comments I just wanted to and one great question as well. First, from Beverly. Oh, can you pull up the one from Beverly? I love this point. Celebrate wins on social media. I think that to me, I love seeing that myself on social media. If someone closes on a deal, particularly if there's a story in there about how maybe they overcame a challenge or something, and there's a little bit of value that the person looking at it can get. I love seeing those stories as well. So I think that's a great point by Bev. And then a question from Pat. And Pat, I apologize. I think it was your question that I missed last week, and I felt terrible about that. I really am trying to build a community here where people feel that they can contribute and their voices are heard. And I felt awful when I noticed that I didn't get to your question. So I apologize for that again. Great interview, guys. What's your advice for finding investors as a first-time syndicator? How do I find investors? How do I approach them? And do I need to tie up property before talking to investors? That's a great question. I think we can actually jump into this before we start talking about the investment metrics as well, because for people that are syndicating deals, this is the huge component to it. They not only need to find properties, but they need to find capital partners that are going to finance it as well. So great question, Pat, and I'll hand it over to Kevin.
Yeah, no, it is a great question. The good thing about where we're at in history, or at this point in time in history, is that there's more liquidity in this marketplace than there probably ever has been, since we've all been alive there watching this interview, right? And so there is a lot of money, chasing a safe home, and real estate seemingly is a very safe hedge against inflation. And so there's a lot of money out there trying to flow into investments. And so if you can be that conduit, then everybody wins. And so that's a good problem to have. With that being said, I'll give you my opinion on how to find investors, right? There's investors out there, but I think the important thing to know, first and foremost, and again, this is just my opinion here, I think it's incredibly important for one to always prove their concept or their business model. If it's syndicating multifamily, if it's syndicating industrial, whatever that means, is to prove their own concept and risk their own capital before going out and actually pulling in, third-party capital from, limited partners, passive investors, what have you. And so I'll put that out there, and that's not necessarily the right or the wrong, but like I think that's important, because ultimately it's a huge responsibility that comes on your shoulders when you create a security and you bring capital in from outside parties. And so I'll expand upon that point a little bit. I think when you take that approach, I'll use multifamily as an example, just because, again, that's similar to the space that we're in. Anything more than one unit's a multifamily. So let's say that you have an intent to go out and syndicate 100+ unit apartment complexes. Well, you surely can't take one of those down on your own. I'm assuming you don't have the capital to do one of those on your own. And so you would need capital partners. But why not? If you have some capital of your own, why not start with a 4-unit property? One that has a value add component to it. 4 units are beautiful because you can get FHA financing. So the financing is a much more attractive for the most part on that type than it would be once you get to the 5 units and above. And again, I don't know if these classifications are the same in Canada, Chad. So
very similar. Yep.
Okay. But start with a 4-unit property. The same value add plan. If that's going to be your stick. I'm a value add multifamily investor. I find opportunities with below market rents, operational inefficiencies that I intend to fix, lower the expenses, increase rents, after remodeling units, and take it from a C+ to a B- property, right? Like, if that's what the plan is, why not just do that same thing with a smaller, 4-unit, 8-unit, 12-unit, whatever you can manage on your own, and document every step of the process and knock it out of the park. The better that you knock that one out of the park and document the entire process, the easier time you're going to have using that as a case study when you go to raise capital for that next larger opportunity. Now, I know that might be the slow path because you just want to dive in and start doing bigger deals today. And so I'd say that's one way. And the other way that I've seen to be very successful for folks is, look at it as a team sport. Don't look at it of how can I attract all the investors I need to do this on my own. I want to be the sole sponsor. Why not, team up, find others they don't have to be local to you, but find others that are in your same business that have skill sets that are complementary to your own, whatever yours might be, and figure out how you can add value to that team. Again, I don't know what your respective skill sets are, but I'm sure there's something that's unique about you that you can bring to another respective team of sponsors. Maybe it's a group of 1, 2, or 3 other folks that are looking to also syndicate multifamily. You guys have each have your own respective networks. You all bring different skill sets to the table. Look at it as a team so that you don't have to think about, how do I raise $3 million or how do I raise $5 million? Well, what if you only had to raise $500,000 and you could be a bigger part of a deal? Now your resume doesn't just have a 12-unit property, but it's got a 100-unit property, but you did it with your team. And ultimately, you could do much more as a team and once you get into these bigger deals than you can as an individual. And so just, again, my opinion on 2 different ways how you'll get in there and attract investors, because ultimately what's going to happen is you need to prove the concept before investors start coming to you and actually start, seeking you out to put their money with. Like, you need to get them excited about something. And I have found that actually a real track record, like something that you can refer to of what you've already done, works a lot better than just hypothetical scenarios. And so, speaking to the team, if those other 3 syndicators that you're going to team up with, let's say that they've already done a deal or 2, so they've got a little bit of a track record. So you get to actually ride the coattails a little bit, right? You bring value to their team, whatever that might be, whatever your unique skill set is. But ultimately, you get to ride coattails of someone that's maybe already built a little bit of a track record. Now, that track record, if you're doing deals together, that is seemingly your track record as well. Again, a little bit of gray area there, but anyway, that's how I've seen folks get into the space that are brand new, get into syndications, and start attracting capital to their investments.
I can't believe how much value you just packed into that answer. I would encourage people to go back and listen to that. Your mission statement that you ad-libbed on there had so much awesome insight into what someone could easily convey on how they would want to start up a syndication and what they would be conveying. So that was awesome. That was such a great answer on that. So thanks for sharing that. I see a couple questions came in from TCS. Wyatt, if you don't mind pulling those up. Hello, great interview. Thanks for that. What's the pricing for mobile parks in your target geography? Going in yield and stabilized yield. Is debt still providing positive leverage? I think we could actually, maybe this is a perfect segue. And thanks for the question on that. Let's jump into this. Is how are you targeting deals that fit into your area, and how do you do it? We'll go from that 30,000 foot view on how you would quickly look at a deal, because you can't spend a couple hours underwriting every deal. You have to eliminate some off the bat. So how do you go through that process of looking at them from a high level and then deciding which ones are worth diving into further? And we'll get to some of those questions about like a going in yield and a stabilized yield and the positive leverage as well.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, like the initial filter we have is like, is it in a market that we'd consider, that's on our list, right? And if it's not, we just kick it out right away. Don't even give it much more time than that. If it's in a market that we like, that we would ultimately like to own in, or maybe we already own in, we'll take a deeper look. But we very rarely do a full model of a deal. Like mobile home parks, they're fairly simplistic in nature for the most part. They've got some unique nuances that are associated with them here and there, but generally speaking, we can normally do a back of the napkin. And we've kind of got a quick evaluator we built in Excel, but I can almost get there with the back of the napkin. I mean, it's a fairly basic formula. But ultimately we just do a real quick and dirty on it to see, if it's within that 10, if we can arrive at roughly 10% or close to 10% of what a real valuation might be once we actually model the entire thing out. And if it falls within the parameters of like, going in cap rates, we normally don't look at going in cap rate. The only reason being is that mobile home parks very rarely are you ever looking at a full stabilized asset. And again, it's a unique asset class. It's becoming consolidated. And so more and more institutions are coming in, and professional investors and private equity. And so, but there's still a lot of mom and pops. There's still a lot of fragmentation in the marketplace. And so what that means is that there's a lot of inefficiencies in a lot of the assets that we look at. And so going in cap rate is somewhat irrelevant to us because, we can very quickly see that the market rents are, the 30% below market. The owner's running all of his expenses through the property, and it's not operating as a professional would operate. And so that the cap rate based on their current NOI is not relevant to the immediate changes that we would put into place within literally 90 days of owning the asset. And so we always kind of look at like, what's a 90-day cap rate, based on like the immediate changes that we're ultimately going to make. But back to the original question is, how do we do how do we look at it, and how do we filter out the good from the bad? But we'll just literally do that, quick and dirty, back of the napkin. If it fits within the general price point, or, where we think the value might be and what they're asking, we'll actually model the entire thing out. But what I found today, what's been more common, if it's coming from a broker, that is that a lot of times they're not priced, which makes, I don't like playing that game, but we do anyway. We participate. That makes it a lot more challenging for us. We kind of got to we got to, put our pencils, put our pencils in the sharpener and sharpen them up as much as possible without trying to overpay for it, and still seemingly getting a decent opportunity. And that's been really challenging over the past 2 years. I will tell you that mobile home parks have gotten a lot of attention, and there's a limited supply. It's a very interesting asset class because it's the only asset class that has a diminishing supply. And so there's actually more parks that are getting, redeveloped or torn down, or, just getting shut down than there are being built. And so that number is slowly dwindling down while there's more competition coming in to buy them. And so we've had a much more challenging time buying from brokers over the past 2 years because we literally get outbid quite often. Whereas going direct to owner, we've got a lot more flexibility, not a lot of competition coming in, value for that same deal, and are able to, strike what we feel is a much fairer price point for that asset. I don't know if that answered your question or not, but I mean, as far as like the initial underwriting, I mean, like the initial filter is like the market. Kick it out if it's not even that marketplace. If it's in the respective market, we do a quick and dirty on it, If it's with the broker, we submit an LOI no matter what. We try to get as close as we can, submit an LOI. If that gets us even in consideration, we'll model it out from there. If that's like far away from, if we offer 13 million and their target was like 17 and a half, well, guess what? I mean, I know that we can't find, we can't close that delta between those two numbers. It's just, it's too big for us. And so we won't go any further thereafter, but we're never doing a full underwriting unless we think that we're literally within like 10% of where we think the value is at and what the seller is hoping to achieve on that property. At that point, we'll take a couple hours. We'll throw it into a 10-year pro forma, model it out, really dig deep into comps, really dig deep into the operational efficiencies and figure out where we can trim things out and how this will realistically look within our operations. So don't know if that answered the question, but I'll stop there to see if there's any clarifying questions.
Yeah, it certainly answered my question. And I know he had a follow-up one as well. And I'll get to that in a second. But I want to touch on that point you made about a going in cap rate, because I couldn't agree with you more on that for the most part, a going in cap rate in today's market is largely irrelevant. Like you can use those numbers and you can say, okay, well, here's the NOI, here's what I have to pay for it, here's a rough cap, but that's not taking into account so many other factors. And industrial real estate market is a perfect example of this. Is you could get a going in cap with a lease with a year remaining on it, but if that's 20% below market, the going in cap is largely irrelevant, because you're gonna reposition that asset in the near future. You might even be able to add more value to it. So I agree with you completely, is that going in cap is less maybe relevant isn't even the right word, but it has less value than what some of these more like yield specific metrics can reveal. So I do want to get your sense on like what you're looking at on an IRR basis, what you're looking at on a stabilized cap basis. But let's get to the other question first, because I think this is important for every asset class, but specific to mobile home parks. What kind of capex or capital expenses do you usually implement in your mobile parks? And thanks again for the great questions.
Yeah, I mean, as far as like on an annual basis, and as far as capex and just operating expenses, or I guess I try to get clarity there as to what that means. Is it just on an annual basis? What are our typical operational expenses look like? Like what percentage of total gross income?
I'm guessing like what you would be looking, and he can clarify here if I don't explain this well, but I'm guessing he's looking at like what type of improvements do you immediately need to make? Like, do you need to repave
Gotcha.
is there asphalt, or do you need to redo the concrete? Like anything structural to the, and I'm guessing you don't actually own the homes themselves. You just
sometimes we do. Yeah.
Sometimes
we do. Yeah. I mean, in a perfect world, we wouldn't own homes, but again, this model has kind of, it's morphed over the years. Back when mobile home parks were built, a lot of these parks were built 50, 60, 70 years ago. For the most part, they were just, developer would come in and build the infrastructure, and then homeowners would go buy their mobile homes or trailers, and they would essentially rent the lots and they would own the homes. And very rarely did you see a rental model to where the park actually owned units. Well, it's shifted a lot over the years, and it's shifted sometimes by accident, sometimes on purpose. As far as what I mean by that is like, we'll buy a property that's been owned by the same owner for the last 30 years. Maybe 30 years ago, it was 100%, resident owned homes. So the park didn't own any of those homes. Well, over the first, decade or two, some folks might have passed away. Their heirs didn't really want that mobile home. And so now you got this home sitting there. They're not inexpensive to move or to get rid of. And it might be a perfectly good home. And so what I've seen a lot of times, either that park will either take that back and try to resell it, or they might just turn it into a rental. And they might have found that rental model, fits their business model well, and they might have accumulated a couple dozen of them over the next decade or so. And so a lot of times we'll buy a park that started off as 100% resident owned, and now it's maybe got 10, 15, 20%, sometimes more park owned units in there. And then the other side of that is the intentional side. I've seen many business models nowadays. I wouldn't say that this is our business model, but it works depending on exactly what you're looking to achieve. Is you're buying a park that's got 100, let's say it's got 100 lots in it. And let's say 50 of those are occupied with resident-owned homes. Let's say the remaining 50 lots, maybe it was in an expansion phase, and those 50 lots are fully developed, but they're vacant. There's nothing on them. All the infrastructure is there, but there's no home on them. So you have two options: either wait for homeowners to come in and fill those homes in, which is could be a slow process, or being the owner of that park, you just go buy 50 homes. You know that there's demand in that marketplace for rentals. You go buy 50 brand new homes, you bring them in, and now you've got a 50 unit horizontal apartment complex that, again, in the right marketplace, has significant demand. And folks, instead of living in an apartment, they get now a 3-bedroom, whatever, 3-bedroom, 2-bath mobile with their own little yard and parking space for their car for potentially less than that of a standard or conventional apartment. So again, long-winded answer to your question there. But typically, back to the original question about CapEx, what we typically do when we take over a park is, depending on what it needs, most of the time, the infrastructure is fairly old in the community, the water and sewer lines, electric. And so first and foremost, before we even buy it, we'll do a sewer scope on the sewer lines to see what they're made out of, to see the condition of them. We'll dig deep into the electrical infrastructure, ensuring that, we're not going to have a massive capital expenditure to upgrade the electrical thereafter. Same with the water lines, depending on if they're made out of like galvanized, which doesn't really hold up all that well. We'll just kind of build those things in. If it's needed, great, we'll put it into the budget. If it's not, we'll let it be, and that won't be one of the improvements we'll make. But infrastructure is probably the most important and probably the most expensive of anything that could ultimately go wrong with the mobile home park, because pretty much everything you see is either roads or it's under the ground, right? That's of a major CapEx expense. And so above ground, roads are probably the most common thing that we do, roads and new signage. So we'll go into a community, we'll re-asphalt the roads if they need it. We'll put a whole new signage package in, entrance signs, directional signs, stop signs. We've kind of have our own company theme, like a brand that we've built over the years. So every park gets the same sign package so that they all, look in unison to one another. Trees are important. A lot of owners skimp on trees. Parks have a lot of trees, get very expensive if they don't keep up with them. So we'll go in and do a massive amount of tree work, lifting trees up, taking old trees out that are a danger to falling on homes, what have you. And then lastly, speaking to the park-owned homes, the ones that maybe the park acquired or inherited, however they came across them. A lot of times we'll go into a community where, mom and pop operated. They acquired or inherited some of these homes, and maybe in the beginning they were able to turn these things and renovate them, get them rented, and then they lose the tenant, and they might be able to get it back online fast. But now they got a second home, a third home, a fourth, more than 3 years, because the owner just didn't have the manpower and the wherewithal himself to actually keep up with that. And so with those, we literally hired 5 contractor crews, literally 5 full-blown crews. They're in there renovating these homes, getting them ready for sale or for rent. So those are the common improvements that we'll make going into a new community. And then aside from that, we don't fix what isn't broken. So if the on-site management is good, the on-site manager, if they're good, if they're the reason why that place is still ticking and doing great and attracts good residents, we'll keep them. A lot of times that is not the case. A lot of times that is one of the pieces that are broken. And so for the most part, I say about 80% of the times we're having to hire and train new on-site management to help facilitate the takeover process. So,
I hope that answered the question, TCS. But if you have a follow-up one or just a clarifying question, feel free to add that into the chat. And thanks for the question and the answer, Kevin. We've got about 5 minutes left. I still want to get your sense on stabilized cap rates and an internal rate of return. And then Neil also had a question, which we'll end with Neil's question, because I think that's a good ending point. But so maybe we'll jump into some of your metrics on either a stabilized cash cap rate on what you're looking for, or your internal rate of return. And I suspect a lot of people are familiar with that terminology. I don't want to overly simplify it if you're not familiar with it, other than I'd strongly encourage you to get a strong grasp on IRR and net present value. But an IRR is really just your average compounded annually return, whether you're doing that on a 10-year projection, or whether you're even looking back on it. So you owned a property for 10 years, you look at all your cash flows, you look at what you had invested into it, you can quickly calculate an IRR in Excel in minutes, and that's just your average annual compounded return. So I'm overly simplifying that term, but it's a very commonly used metric in commercial real estate. So with that in mind, your stabilized cap rate and your IRR, what are you typically projecting on that?
Yeah, and the IRRs and we always look at things on typically like a 5 to 7 year hold. Although we're long term holders, and so we always like to we buy in funds, and so we buy multiple assets underneath one umbrella. And over the years, we'll kind of pluck out the ones that we don't feel are the best fit for one reason or another for long term holds. We'll recapitalize the ones we want to hold for a long time and sell off the others, get it, investors' original equity back to them, and then tend to ride off into the sunset with the remaining assets that might be in that respective fund. But as far as projections, like on our current fund today, projections are in the 14 to 16% IRR. I can say historically we've always been able to surpass that, but times are different today than what they were 2 or 3 years ago as far as yields on pretty much any respective asset classes that are out there. Mobile home parks aren't foreign to compressed cap rates. Lots of competition vying for that same asset class. So as far as kind of the going in metrics of, we look at, so we raise capital from high net worth individuals. We've got a blended cost of capital of just shy of 7%. So I think it's like 6.76% when you blend the few different investment classes together. And so that's kind of like our first barometer. Like we need, so that we are not ultimately digging a hole, right? We need to be able to meet a minimum pref to our investors. We also have asset management fees and other operational expenses layered in there, but ultimately that's kind of like our initial baseline. And we need to know that we can ultimately achieve that initial baseline within the first 12 months. And that's like a worst case scenario. Like it should be happening day one or shortly thereafter, but worst case scenario, if it's a phenomenal asset in an incredible marketplace that we know has a long runway ahead of it, worst case, it needs to be, 12-month span of time that we need to be able to hit that initial threshold. And thereafter, I'd say our stabilized cap rate is somewhere in the, the 7.5-ish, 8%, range, once we've executed the entirety of the business plan. But, historically, we've sold a couple assets recently, assets that we've owned for, roughly 3 years. And I don't like even sharing historical metrics. The reason why is over the last couple of years, the rising tide has lifted all boats. And, one that literally doesn't know the front of his hand from the back of his hand probably could have made really good money in real estate, right? If they just bought something, if they overpaid for it 3 years ago and sold it in the past 6 months, they probably would have come out ahead, even if they made every mistake in the world in the middle, right? And so our historical returns or IRRs on most of the assets that we've sold have been, we've hit in the 30s and 40%, and some that are even higher than that, right? But we always like to be conservative going into these things, and knowing that the tides will ultimately change at some point, and those high, somewhat egregious returns might not always be the case. And so again, 14-16% is what we projected. Feeling it's conservative, but very much in line with our business model, and knowing that we can very comfortably hit that.
Yeah, that very well said on that. And we are running to the end. So Wyatt, if you can pull up Neil's question real quick. What are the upsides to owning mobile parks rather than multifamily or commercial? I'm not actually going to get you to answer this. I'm going to leave this as a cliffhanger. And instead of you answering it, where can people go to find out about your podcast where you talk about this extensively?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So you can find me at cashflowinvestor.com. There you'll have links to, both. I just launched a book recently. You also have links to my company, Sunrise Capital Investors, and the podcast and everything else that we do. So cashflowinvestor.com is the best place to go.
Okay. And Beverly, thanks for putting the links. We put links to your website and your LinkedIn description. So I'd encourage everybody to go listen to your podcast. You put out an awesome show, great resource. Loved everything you had to say on this. And I'd love to continue the conversation down the road. And I'm sure there's a ton more things that we could easily dive into on that. But ultimately, I really do appreciate your time and insights on this, Kevin.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Chad. It's been a lot of fun.
Okay, well, we'll certainly keep in touch. When I'm in Clearwater, we're going to get together and have coffee or lunch.
That sounds like a plan. I'm buying.
Awesome. Okay, thanks again, everyone. And thanks for everyone that tuned in and asked questions. Really do appreciate you taking the time to listen. So thanks, everyone. Have a great day.